Well, hello and welcome to the Beyond Business as Usual interview series. My name is Philippe Dubray and I'm your host. And today I have the pleasure to talk about discussion with Paul Slowey, who is the co-founder of Oasis Diagnostics. So thank you very much, Paul, for
Very
attending.
welcome. Glad to be
Yeah,
here.
I'm excited to hear about your story, your journey, and we're talking a little bit about before the interview, a little bit about your path, and that's very interesting. So let's kick it off with a little bit of who you are, and how did you end up where you are now in
Where I
terms of
am now.
the
Okay,
company.
so my background is PhD in organic chemistry. I was born in the United Kingdom. I was born in the very northeast part of England, north of the Roman Wall, but south of the Scottish border. It's a place called Northumberland where there are more sheep and cows than people. But I grew up in a coal mining village, which at the time was the biggest coal mining village in the world. There were seven coal mines, 30,000 people, and just about everybody down in the town worked down the coal mine, except my father made a pledge to me that I would never work down the mine, and he kept that promise to me. So, I studied well. I was very good at chemistry, and so I got my first degree in Sheffield, England, and then went to Newcastle University, which was my local university, but lived in dormitories with a whole bunch of doctors, training doctors, and then. When I finished my PhD, I spoke to my supervisor and said, I'd love to go somewhere in the world. I'm not ready for the workforce yet. I would like to do a postdoctoral fellowship. So he basically said, I have a really good friend who lives in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. If you would
Oh,
like to take a look at the research that he's doing, and if it looks good, then I'll put in a good word for you. So sure enough, I looked at the papers and it was fantastic. I never actually looked on the map to see where Victoria was. I never looked at the climate. I wanted to be surprised. So I took the flight, which was at that time 24 hours on like four different flights on Canadian
wow.
Pacific Airways with the Canadian National Women's Ice Hockey Team, which was a riot on the plane. You can imagine they were
Oh
all
my God, that was a bit
they
fun.
were all drunk on the plane and very happy. So, but I landed in Victoria, and it was fairly soon after Mount St. Helens blew in yeah, North America here, and the skies were kind of lit up. The sunsets and the sunrises were just so beautiful because of
Mhm.
all the ash in the atmosphere from the volcano erupting. And
Oh,
I
wow.
kind of fell in love with that place. And I spent 2 years in Victoria as a postdoc and wanted to stay a third year, but my supervisor couldn't find the funding for me, so I ended up going to the other extreme. I ended up in St. John's, Newfoundland. So I took a train across Canada twice, actually, 4 days on the train. Uh, you know, Landed in Halifax by train, and then took the flight over to St. John's. And the very next morning, I got up, and this was February the 2nd, 1984. I woke up and there was 9 feet of snow. I couldn't see out of my window. There was no snow the day I got there. The next day there was 9 feet of snow. So
Wow.
I was there for about almost 9 months. But during the summer of my first year tenure there, my wife and I, future wife at that time, went back to the UK to get married. And while I was there, I was actually offered a job in the pharmaceutical business. So there's a company called Sterling Drug in the United Kingdom that offered me a job. I spent 5 years with a very high amount of responsibility, but very little pay for that. I
Mhm.
was the head of a drug discovery group of five different PhDs. I was also the radiochemist. I was responsible for radiological safety of about 30 people using radiochemicals at the facility. And I was also the large scale chemist. So I would get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to switch chemical reactions off. And one day I kind of woke up with a 2-year-old child and said, I've had enough of this. I'm going back to Canada. So we basically went back to Toronto for a year. We sold everything we had, and we
Wow.
managed to make enough money to purchase one trunk of our clothes to get across the Atlantic, and the airfare, nothing else. And I had no job to go to, so we took a job in the trade show business, selling trade show exhibits. And fast forward about 1 year, I had an interview for a job in the diagnostic business and in Toronto, and I'd already made the decision to move to Vancouver, which is where I was originally, Vancouver, Victoria.
Mhm.
And took the train again across Canada and got the job, started for a company called Inkstar Corporation in 1990. At that time, I was a sales rep looking after a bigger territory than the United States. So I had British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Yukon, Northwest Territories. And so I would drive around BC and Alberta, and I would fly to Saskatchewan and Yukon and Northwest Territories. And I did a really good job. And the company was actually based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And at that time, I was asked if I'd like to interview for an international sales position within the same organization. And I interviewed with about 5 PhDs, and because I had the English accent, because I could speak, at the time I could speak a little French. I'm not very good anymore, but I actually got the job, and I was kind of amazed because I didn't have a visa to go to the US, so they had to petition for an L1 visa to get me to the United States. And my wife and my children and I followed later on. But I worked there for 3 years as the head of international business for a company that's now about $500 million, and
Wow.
they were doing very well, and I could probably still be there right now. But one day out of the blue, I got a call from a headhunter in Vancouver, Washington, which is where I am now, to come and work for a startup saliva testing company. And I looked at the company, and it was a startup. They had funding to get them through for a few years. So I took the job and very quickly became chief operating officer for the company. It was called Saliva Diagnostic Systems, just about 2 or 3 miles from here. And they kind of ran out of money after about 3 or 4 years, and I transitioned to another company, which is now about a $400 million company in the saliva world called Orasure Technologies. They sell products to 23andMe and Ancestry.com and companies like that.
Wow.
And then after a couple of years, they went through a merger and decided to move everybody to Pennsylvania. And I'm kind of a West Coast person. So I went to Pennsylvania, took a look, and I said, no, this is not really for me. So at that point, I started my own company. I had a business partner for about 4 years. We started the business in 2002. Unfortunately, he was a bit of a bad guy that I didn't know at the time, and he tried to steal all the intellectual property from the company. So it's a long story, but I ended up having to sue him and won a couple of lawsuits against him, and eventually kicked him out, bought his shares. And since then, I've been the sole owner until about 2015, when a company called Meridian Bioscience invested in my company. So they're based in Cincinnati, Ohio. They're now owned by a Korean company, but they own about 30% of Oasis Diagnostics Corporation. So over the 22 years, we've built about 10 different technologies for saliva collection that can be used for just about anything. So we can collect DNA from saliva for consumer genetics, like 23andMe. We can collect RNA for COVID testing. We can collect proteins for Alzheimer's testing, for cancer testing. We have devices that can be used by babies, infants, children, geriatrics, adults. And we have devices that collect cell-free samples, which may not mean a lot to the audience, but typically, if you remove the cells from a sample, you literally have a cell-free sample that can be used to detect things like cancer. And
Oh,
with
really?
one drop of one of our devices, we can actually diagnose lung cancer in about 30 minutes. We don't
Wow.
have the test. We don't have the test technology to do that, so we have to partner with companies. So we provide literally the front-end sample collection for all of these different types of tests. And the business is starting to grow quite a bit. But during the COVID pandemic, we became the only saliva company that's part of what's called the RADx project.
Mhm.
President Trump at that time gave about $500 million for as many COVID tests to be developed as possible. And that meant any format possible. So many companies basically put their hat in the ring and said, we can develop a test by PCR, or we can develop an antigen test. But they all needed specimens. Most people used a swab, which you're probably familiar with. But
Oh,
Oasis
yeah, yeah.
we became the only company that actually used saliva to collect the samples for
Really? So you do it
testing.
without having to insert this thing like halfway up your brain or something like this? No?
Right. Well, there's good news and bad news, because we got 7.5 million from the federal government here under the RADx project, but about 6.75 of that went to a contract manufacturer, which is Canon, the camera company, the copier company. They became our subcontract to actually manufacture large volumes for us. The
Okay.
big problem was that all of these companies that we were working with, so we provide the front end, they provide the diagnostic test. They had to go through an FDA approval, and None of them managed to get their FDA approval. So
Mm.
the good news is we basically got this funding, and we're currently scaled up to actually produce about 2.2 million units a month between ourselves and Canon, but no orders for COVID. We sell a lot to other types of different, diseases. Alzheimer's disease is a big thing for us, particularly, and cancer and hormone testing and a lot of that types of things. We sell to clinical research organizations. We sell to companies like Moderna that are developing vaccines and that type of stuff. So the business it's kind of unique. There are several companies that do what we do, but the type of portfolio that we have covers a lot more than the competition out there. So we have about 6,500 square feet here and operations that produce all of these devices. And we have a device that actually can also tell you in real time what your cortisol level is, for instance. So we can actually fully quantify biomarkers in a saliva sample in 20 minutes. So
Wow.
typically a COVID test would be it's a yes no answer. You stick the swab up your nose, you put it into the device, and you get two lines that says yes you have it, no you don't. In
Mhm.
our case, we can actually fully quantify levels of biomarkers in saliva. So theoretically, as long as you have a protein-based test, we can measure cortisol levels, we can measure testosterone. If you have proteins for hepatitis C, we can measure hepatitis C. We have some companies that want to do things like cardiovascular disease and general wellness testing for various hormones and things like that. So that's kind of the future. The technologies that we have for sample collection are the present, but then the future is we call it Verify and Liam, and it's a fully automatable, point of care device that you could use in your home, for instance.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. And this is great story of your journey, Paul. It's inspirational, right? And what I'm seeing here, there's a common thread. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're driven by your passion, right?
Absolutely.
And then
Absolutely. Yeah.
and that shows. It shows that you're wanting to help people, you're wanting to care for people, and that's really being a driving force in everything you've been doing, like in sales and this and that. And it's interesting to see, and I'm hearing something, all of these various experiences that you've had throughout your journey culminated in you but going, okay, let's go, let's have a company here, let's run with this, right? It takes lots of guts and courage and lots of grit
Yeah,
to,
I tell one particular story I should tell is, I
yeah.
I grew up in a coal mining village, and my parents, although we didn't have very much, we couldn't afford to buy a house. We had to rent the house from the local council, so we didn't have anything. But they managed to make sure that we had everything that we needed. But what that does for me particularly is that money's not a motivator. The reason I kicked my business partner out, he was very money oriented, and all he could see was the dollar signs for the things that we were developing. And these things take years and years. You can't expect things to go like that. So I said, my motivation is to help people. If I can save one life, then I've done my job, right? There are devices that we have that can be used to diagnose various diseases. Right now, there's a test in development that will be able to tell you what your risk is for congestive heart failure, for instance,
Okay.
that uses a saliva specimen and looks at what they call
Just saliva.
microRNAs. Yeah, microRNAs in saliva. Yeah, we know the lung cancer test is already on the market. Other cancers are possible. We just need to identify the right partners to do that. So
Amazing.
I think we're there and we're helping people, and that's really the overarching goal. So when somebody came to me and said, "Well, why don't you just, when this Radix project started, one of the founders on there said, well, why don't you just license it to Canon, and you take 10 cents on every device that you sell?" And I said, well, that'd be really nice, but that doesn't really, accomplish the goal that I'm trying to achieve. So, it's not been easy. It's been quite a struggle, especially through the pandemic. So, we've been through some really, really tough times, and, there'll probably be more tough times to come, but, we'll try and ride that storm when it happens.
Well, exactly. And I think that it's a common trait. I've been interviewing I've been working with lots of entrepreneurs, and that's a common trait. Like the vision, then that keeps you going, and the steadfastness and the grit and the persistence to make things happen. It's all part of being successful at this. And
Yeah, I feel like we're not fulfilled. We're 22 years old, but we're definitely not fulfilled yet. And we've got to have that fulfillment. So I'm 69, and I still feel like I've got years in me that that drives this particular model forward.
oh, I can.
And at some point, I need somebody that's maybe a CEO that can take the company to 50 million or 100 million or 500 million. I'm not that person. I'm the entrepreneur that has the passion to get it to where it needs to be, so that somebody else can carry the baton after that.
Oh yeah, 100%. And again, there's the goal maker, right? Which is you, right? You're person with the vision and the goal and all of this. And then there's the integrator or the management, and you give that to them and you go like, okay, now execute, now get it done, right? And
Right.
they
Yeah, yeah.
just and they take care of all of that stuff, and they make the they materialize your goals, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And
Correct.
I can see you having the vision and all that. This is fantastic. Now, okay, so just want to make another question for you here, if you don't mind. Now, building a team, building a group, having a successful business requires a good team. Okay, how do you get the right people, put them on the right seat? I'd like to get a little bit of your views on this because that's important.
Right. The way that I interview people is it's with my gut, and my wife is the HR director, so she's obviously got a major role to play in that. But when it comes down to it, it's the connection between yourself and the employee. I mean, assuming that I'm looking for a VP of sales, he obviously has to have the good background in sales, but there's also that connection, the mind connection that this person feels the same way as I do. They have the same goals as I do. They are ethical, honest, which is a really important criteria for us. We've never done anything bad in our lifetimes. And people ask me to sign a non-disclosure agreement. I'll sign it at a heartbeat. I said, my goal is not to steal anything from anybody. My goal is to collaborate. Yeah, and that's our business model. We have to be able to collaborate with others because we're a small company. We are much more nimble than the big companies that are lumbering and take forever to get anywhere. So partnering with small companies is a specific exercise that we have to do. But back to your question, I think there has to be that connection between us. And I think in the history of the company, we only ever hired one bad employee. And the reason that we did it was, we actually went to an outside hiring agency for the first time ever and asked them to find a candidate for us. So he was a guy that was in the Coast Guard, and he, followed the chain of command, but he was the worst employee, and he didn't follow the chain of command, and he did everything opposite to what they told us he was. And we paid a lot of money to get him in, and we basically fired him one day before his 90-day probationary period was up. But up until then, we've been very, and even to the point where we hire a lot of interns and from local universities. I'm very careful about the ones that we bring in. Most of them have actually ended up either as full-time employees that started for like 3 months and then became full-time employees and then moved up the organization, or they basically stayed here for 3 months and said, it's fantastic working here. Can we use you as a reference? We really enjoyed working here. And we feel good about our kind of track record in the HR area, I think.
Oh, that's fantastic. No, this is great. Again, you mentioned a few key points. I'm hearing some core values here, using from you, like honesty, transparency. That's some of these things that I'm getting from you, the wanting to help, what are beside all those, what are the other core values on which you have built your business?
Well, I think listening is really important. When I was at the $500 million company I mentioned, which was really only 44 million when I was there, based in Minneapolis area, we went through a thing called shared values, and that basically taught us that anybody in the organization can have ideas, including the janitor that comes in every day to clean the floors. Listen to people. Get them to express their opinions. Your opinions aren't always the right answers, and and in fact, you know, if I am a dictator and I tell people how I want things to go, I'm probably going to make mistakes. You know, I have to have people there to tell me, you know, Paul, that's not right. I like your idea, but this, you know, you could actually do it better this way. So I'm a good listener. And in fact, when I first took the very first job in Toronto, the guy who interviewed me lived in Toronto, and he was the I think it was like the VP for sales for Canada, and he basically asked me the question, um, what is the best? We have five senses. Which is the most important sense for a salesman? And you know, I said listening, of course. And he said, well, you say, of course. He said most of the people I interviewed said, you know, seeing or you know, not
Really?
hearing. He said you're the first one that's actually said listening because you know you have to listen to what the customer says. Yeah, I'm a good talker, but I'm also a good listener. I'm talking a lot today. Typically, you know,
It's all
I'm gonna
about you. Look, Paul,
yeah,
it's all about you, and
yeah,
I
but
love
normally
hearing your stories. Just so you know, it's okay.
normally I'll listen to people and I might not have the same opinion, but I'll basically say, look, you know, how about, you know, this, and they'll think about that. And then maybe there's a compromise solution that you know, results from the interaction between the two of us. It's not a one-way, it's definitely not a one-way street for sure.
100%. 100%. I tell that to salespeople as well. Look, sales, 80% listening, 20% you talking.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
be curious about the other person, right?
Right,
Ask
right.
questions and listen, right? And you know, this is so key. And that resonates to with me so much what you're saying, because that's so true,
Hmm,
right?
hmm. Yeah.
No, that's great.
Yeah,
Okay,
and if a
so
product, I mean, if they say the product, you know, failed in their particular, you know, establishment in their research study, then it failed. Then we got to figure out exactly why it failed. Now, it might be their fault, but we're not going to tell them it's their fault. We're going to figure out exactly what went wrong, and we've done that on multiple occasions. You know, in certain cases, it's our fault, and then you know, there's a complaint, and we handle it through the complaint handling system. We replace the goods, and everybody's happy. But it's not always the customer's fault. You know, we have to listen to what they're telling us.
oh yeah, completely, 100%. Now look, let's say I go, how many staff do you have, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, we had 16. We're like about eight right now.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, and we're in a kind of a growth pattern right now because we've got some significant orders. So, you know, we probably get up to about 12 in the next 3 months or so.
Fantastic. So if I go see your staff, right, and I ask them, okay, so let's say I take a plane and I go see your staff in Vancouver, Washington. Make sure I don't end up in Vancouver, Canada. But okay,
Right.
so and I ask them, what do you feel is valuable, or why do you like working in Paul's company? What are they going to answer? What kind of answer would I get from them?
I think they say friendly. Um, Listening. You know, the first thing I did this morning, I set my computer up when I get here. We start at 6 o'clock in the morning. We have traffic here in the afternoon, so we work from about 6 till 2:30 in order for them to beat the traffic. So I was here a little bit later, about 6:15 or whatever. And the first thing I do once I get the computer set up is I go and talk to them and say, you know, how was your weekend? You know, it's funny. A lot of my employees are actually friends of I play soccer. You know, I still play soccer. I'm 69. We play over 65 soccer, and two of the employees are, well, three of the employees are actually sons of guys that I play soccer with. So, you know, when we really needed people in a hurry, and you know, one of them's worked in Korea before, so he's been around a lot, and they're very good workers. But you know, I went to a soccer practice once, and I said I need some. At that time, it was like temporary workers, but you know, they came in, they did a really good job. They fulfilled everything I wanted them to do. So you know, we kept them on long term. So you know, now when they go in, I go in there and I talk to the employees and see how they're doing, and you know, that type of thing. So also informative. If there's a problem, I'll keep them informed on what's happening. If we're running short of cash, you know, and I have to make some changes, I'll let them know well ahead, so they can make their plans as well. Touch wood, that's not going to happen anymore. But we
No, that's
have,
not
you know, we got we the project I mentioned for the point of care device that we have that tells you quantitative biomarker levels in real time. We had a project where we got about 1.6 million from the federal government under a grant, and it just wasn't enough to support the project. So before it literally, it came, you know, apparent that we weren't going to have enough money to see the project through to its fruition. And I'm still actually working on the finance for that. But I had to inform the people well in advance so that they could look for alternate employment, because I said once the grant is up, unless I can find some investor cash, I'm going to have to let you go. So I try to be as informative as I can so they can make the right decisions.
That must be, that sounds like a great place to work in, right? The transparency, the honesty, you value the people you work with. I can see that. And for a staff, it's way more than just, a job is way more than a paycheck. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the feeling of belonging to the team, the feeling that you're contributing to something great. All of these things is what drives people to do things, right? And keep them
The
motivated.
worst thing I had to do is, when the same people that we have right now are here, but there was a gap when, we didn't have any orders and I had to send them home for a week. That was the hardest decision. I cried. I mean, I cried because I had to send them home, and, because their families rely on us to support their existence, so, I have a responsibility to them. And
I I totally get it. No, and again, you care. So I mean, it's like it's. But again, I can see. You got a great future there. You got a great product. It's needed. And I know you guys will do well. I can feel it just because of your great leadership, right? This business goes
well,
through the.
there's a couple of things I didn't mention that might be important just to give an overall picture of myself
Uh-huh.
is, um, I spent a lot of time in China going for presentations, conferences, and as a result, I was awarded an honorary professorship of a university in Changsha, China, which is it's a city of about 12 million Chinese, and there really aren't any immigrants in this city. It's basically 12 million Chinese. So, white people like myself stand out. But it was interesting being there. It's a very vibrant city, and it's the place where Chairman Mao went to college. So I've actually visited, where he went to school. The other thing is I'm the co-chair of what's called the Salivary Working Group for Alzheimer's Disease Biomarkers, which
Mhm.
is an umbrella organization underneath the Alzheimer's Association. So we have a global group of about 50 researchers that are working on saliva and using saliva as a diagnostic tool for Alzheimer's disease.
Mhm.
And I'm the co-chair, so we just actually are in the middle of publishing a paper, which will be, in my opinion, the Bible of saliva work on the Alzheimer's field, and it should be published before the end of the year. And myself and my colleagues are senior authors on that project, so we're very proud of that, and we hope that we can use saliva rather than blood. There are a lot of blood biomarkers coming through right now, but blood is still invasive. We want to be able to do it non-invasively for the sake of people. So that's just a couple of things that adds to my background, if you like. And the third thing that I didn't mention, I
Yeah.
organize saliva symposia around the world, and we've had 6 in the United States, started in 2014, and 5 in India, 4 in Australia, 1 in China, and we're having the very first one in Italy in April next year. And what we do is we bring together the likes of 23andMe and Ancestry.com, the commercial companies that are actually doing things with saliva commercially, with the researchers that are kind of developing the next wave of tests coming through. So they might
Mhm.
have biomarkers for, cardiovascular disease or, heart attack or something like that. And I get them to speak, and then the two parties collaborate, and then hopefully new tests come out of that. And, I'm kind of not involved in that other than to introduce and bring the speakers together and organize the poster sessions and all that sort of stuff.
Oh,
So,
that's a big point. Look, Paul, if
mhm.
you were there, you're almost like a catalyst for all of this happening. That's what I'm hearing right now,
I'm
right?
trying. I'm trying to be a
Oh,
catalyst. Yeah,
you are. You are. I mean, again, it's interesting because you get these people floating around, and you go like, okay, let's
let's bring
let's
them
get
together.
things
Yeah,
together, and then all of a sudden you see this thing happening. Right? You go like, well, this is fantastic.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, I love this. This is great. One last question. We're getting to the end of the interview here. I could talk with you for hours. This is amazing.
Uh-huh.
Now, okay, so let's say you and I we have a time machine. We go back in time to when you first started your business. Okay. What advice would you give to your younger self, knowing your growth path and everything you've gone through right now? What would
Right.
be the advice you give to yourself that would assure your success?
That's quite an easy question because even as of today, we are a development company and not a sales and marketing company. So what I did was I spent all of our cash developing the tools that we have. And we have the best range of tools out there. People tell us that. The problem we've got is, we're very small. OraSure Technologies, my biggest competitor, is a $400 million company. The reason that they're 400 million and I'm just a small company right now is because I invested everything in development to the detriment of sales and marketing. What I should have done was, as soon as we had 2 or 3 of the technologies developed, have a sales team, a VP sales and marketing, a VP business development to go out there and really get these devices into the market. It's happening now, organically. But not, we've got a good website and we've got, a couple of salespeople. But, if we'd had a sales force of, 20, 30 people and a VP that basically sat on them, we would probably be a $400 million company too. So, don't invest in one particular facet of the business to the detriment of another.
That's awesome. That's a great advice. And again, look, Paul, the future hasn't happened yet.
Yeah,
it's a blank canvas, right?
it is. It
So,
is.
you can become, there's a growth path for your business to become a $400 million company. I mean, there is, because there's a need you solve a problem with you solve something with your service, with your product, and it's very much needed. So, I envision success for you and
Thank
your
you.
company.
I hope
And
so. Yeah, I hope so.
it's going to be great. Okay, good. Well, we're arrived to the end of our podcast. So I want to thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure and very enlightening to talk with you, Paul. This was amazing. So thank you very much for participating to our podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's been very inspiring for me as well. I've enjoyed it a lot. Thank you.
I love it. Okay, good. And for the rest of the audience, well, thank you very much for watching. Until the next time, well, keep growing your business, keep being motivated, because there's always a solution. There's growth.
Keep smiling and keep smiling.
Yes, and keep smiling. Keep being positive. Thank you very much. Bye bye for now.
Bye bye.